Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shobh on the programme tonight, and it's a special show this evening. We'll be looking at two key aspects of the fight back against COVID. Firstly, how India is the vaccine pharmacy of the world, how vaccines are making a profound impact all over the world, Indian-made vaccines. And also what the new data of the nationwide sero survey, which has come out today, tells us, where 1 in 5 people in the country has evidently had COVID. We'll also be focusing on some of the new vaccines coming up. And we have quite simply the best guests on this topic in the country. Dr. Randeep Guleria of the All India Institute, Dr. V.K. Paul of the Niti Aayog, Dr. Suresh Jadhav, Executive Director of the Serum Institute, and Ambassador Navdeep Suri, now a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. So we are talking about diplomacy, we are talking about vaccine manufacturers, and we are talking about the future of vaccines, how we can all get better. But as far as India's gifts or commercial sales, as the case may be, of vaccines are concerned, here is where we stand. Let's bring up this map. Now, from the 20th of January 2021 onwards, we have gifted over 56 lakh doses of vaccines to our neighboring countries and our neighborhood: Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Bahrain, Oman. These supplies were based on requests from these countries. Now, over the next few days, we plan to give further quantities to Caribbean nations, CARICOM countries, Nicaragua and Pacific Island states. Now, that's just what we've given. Commercial exports have taken place to Brazil, Morocco, Bangladesh, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, and further supplies on commercial basis are likely to take place to Saudi Arabia, to Canada, to Mongolia as well. Further, we are going to supply 1 crore doses to Africa, 10 lakh to United Nations health workers under Gavi's COVAX facility. That's the World Health Organization COVAX facility, a storage in a sense where it's disseminated to different parts of the world. So this is all absolutely incredible. The number of exports or gifts that India has given, truly staggering. But before we get to that, there was important news today on a sero survey, a nationwide one, which has actually given us an idea of how many Indians have thus far had COVID. And the numbers are staggering: 1 in 5 Indians, if this survey is correct.
1 in every 5 individuals has COVID antibodies, meaning they've been infected at some stage. The government today said its survey found the sero prevalence at 21.5% of India's population. That effectively means roughly 29 crore people have been infected with COVID compared to the confirmed 1.07 crore cases.
इस सीरो सर्वे ने यह दिखाया है कि पैंडेमिक देश में आगे बढ़ी है। 21-22% लोग कवर हो गए हैं। जितनी भी एंटीबॉडी के बेसिस पे हमें अंडरस्टैंडिंग आती है कि इतना पॉपुलेशन ऑफ इंडिया हैज बीन इन्फेक्टेड।
The survey found more children had been infected with COVID than any other age group, including those above 60 years old. The government highlighted that a large population is still susceptible to the virus, and that is why increased precautions need to be continued. Even as the vaccinations continue on track, a dozen states have inoculated over half the targeted healthcare workers.
अभी तक हमने 43,91,826 हेल्थ केयर वर्कर्स को वैक्सीनेट किया है, which is 45% of the universe.
The government today responded to questions over vaccine vials expiring, given how on some days very few are used.
Not a single dose will be wasted because we could not administer before the expiry dose. So be totally rest assured. We are monitoring this on a daily basis.
Nearly 46 lakh people have been vaccinated in India till today afternoon, and India plans to vaccinate a total of 30 crore people by July 2021. In New Delhi, this is Sukirti Dwivedi for NDTV.
Well, joining us, Dr. V.K. Paul, Navdeep Suri, Dr. Randeep Guleria and Dr. Suresh Jadhav. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. I'd like to start first by bringing up, and what we're going to try and do is bring up various questions, plaques, try and get an answer to what people have actually been writing in to us. First, about some of the sero surveys data which have actually come in. So the first question is this, and the question is to you, Dr. Paul. Does the sero survey indicate that far more people have had COVID than estimated? So let's have that plaque up. Does the sero survey indicate that far more people have had COVID than estimated? And can we have Dr. V.K. Paul answer that first question? Dr. Paul, go ahead.
Well, yes, truly. Yes, we have had more people infected with this virus than the confirmed cases. This is the situation always in such estimates, because every case that is confirmed on test is not equal to every case who's infected. We do know forever that a large proportion of infections are asymptomatic, and if they are asymptomatic, they are difficult to be picked up, and therefore we have two different types of information, one coming from confirmed cases. For every confirmed case, there is a multiple of those cases which form the universe of total infected cases. Yes.
Dr. Paul, 1.07 crore cases is the official number thus far. But if we go by the sero survey, it's 29 crore Indians who have been infected. So that multiplier is absolutely huge, isn't it?
Well, it is not surprise at all.
Right.
In our previous sero surveys as well, such multiples were there. In fact, in a way, it is consistent, because in the last time around, again, this multiple was around 30. This is not at all a surprise. But the value of doing such a sero survey lies precisely in learning the true extent of infection across a given population. So these are two types of information. Nobody in any country is trying to pick up every case uninfected, every case asymptomatic as well as symptomatic. It is really not practical, not done. But this is the true value of the survey, is that we understand the extent of the pandemic more completely, more comprehensively. In a way, it is also more consistent as we see it.
Dr. Guleria, how close are we to herd immunity?
So I think what the survey shows is that we are not very close to herd immunity. I think the concept of herd immunity is going to be very difficult to achieve. The only way we can achieve herd immunity is by vaccination and having an aggressive vaccination program. But I'll just like to add one more thing. Although the numbers, like you said, is very high, but that also means that our infective fatality rate, number of people who got infected with COVID-19, number of people who died, actually is even much lower. That means we have a very, very low mortality as far as COVID-19 is concerned, if we assume that so many people had COVID-19 and the number that died. So it really tells us that the COVID is not that fatal a disease as we had initially thought of in our country, but also that we have a significant amount of population which is still susceptible, and therefore COVID appropriate behavior becomes all the more important, and we need to have a very close surveillance just to make sure that we don't have another spike because of the variant strains.
Dr. Paul, back to you. Is Delhi closer to herd immunity than other states, given that the sero survey here is well above 50%? And as I understand it, herd immunity kicks in from 60% onwards as far as the WHO is concerned. There are lots of people who have reservations on herd immunity and whether that's the way to go. I'm just asking, on the basis of these sero survey numbers, are we actually approaching that, for example, in Delhi?
Well, in Delhi, we believe overall 56% of people have antibodies. Presumably, they have been exposed. And yes, indeed, it means that there has been a very intense pandemic in Delhi. I must also say that we could also expect a similar level of antibody positivity in some of the other highly dense cities, such as, let's say, Mumbai. One would expect that because we do know that this pandemic was concentrated in more dense, large metropolitan cities, because that is the nature of the virus. Having said that, there is no way that anybody can say that that herd immunity levels have been achieved even at this level of positivity. The case in point is WHO's own pronouncements
At some point, it was said that 60 to 70% positivity would indicate herd immunity. It has been changing, the goalpost has been changing, but more significantly, in the wake of the mutations that are seen across the world, there is a telling evidence from Brazil which shows that even at 76% antibody positivity, the infection was spreading, the pandemic was still spreading. So I think this level is no guarantee to the Delhiites that herd immunity of a level has been achieved that in such a way that there will be no spread of infection. I think look at it conversely. More than 40% of Delhiites are still susceptible to the virus.
Correct.
And therefore, there is no reason for us to lower our guard, and there is no reason for us to throw away the precautions, and there is absolutely every reason for Delhiites to embrace vaccination.
One more question to Dr. Guleria before I go across to Dr. Jadhav and Ambassador Suri. Dr. Guleria, the number of children affected, higher than expected. Remember when we started talking about this almost a year back, and it's frightening to think that we've gone through this for so long, there was a sense that children would be hardly affected or barely affected, but now the sero survey indicates that quite a few. So what is your medical assessment of that, sir?
So I think what was happening in the early days was because of the lockdown and that schools were all closed and there was really no movement as far as children was concerned, the number of cases were less. What we do know is that children are equally susceptible, but they do have a milder form of disease and they don't get severe illness as we see in adults. So this is also borne out by the data that now with let's say things opening out, lockdown being lifted and there being some movement even among children, the number of cases is high there as compared to the number of children who actually get admitted or who actually need ICU care. So this number has gone up as if you look at as what was there in the previous sero surveillance surveys, and therefore this is to some extent to be expected. But yes, children are therefore susceptible, and we need to be very careful, especially as we start opening schools and colleges.
Okay, now that's an important point.
And Vishnu, there's another point that children would also be spreading the disease. We also have to keep that in mind, that this data demonstrates that they get infected and therefore they are vulnerable, although they have mild disease, but also potentially they are also the spreaders of the disease, and therefore protecting every individual, adults in particular, old age people in particular, remains very vital.
Dr. Jadhav, you, as the Executive Director of the Serum Institute, and you know, I had the opportunity of going there some weeks back, I saw the incredible pace of manufacture, which struck me most. And it's not just Serum, there are other wonderful companies in India as well. But the question a lot of people ask is, does India's export of vaccines affect the availability for domestic demand?
Definitely not. I think whatever demand has come from Government of India so far has been already supplied within 3 to 4 days' time. Today we are actually sitting on a stockpile of almost about 76 million doses, and this is after supplying almost about 37.5 million doses already distributed. So we don't see any problem with the demand increasing from outside, because our monthly production rate at this moment is almost about 50 to 60 million doses for next couple of months, and from April onwards we expect to bring it up to almost about 100 million doses per month.
Dr. Jadhav, as you know, you were involved in the process of bringing the AstraZeneca drug over here to India. When this started getting rolled out, when you saw the efficacy numbers, when you saw the way that it's starting to affect the lives of people around the world, tell us what it feels, and don't talk to us just as a doctor and a scientist, because there were risks which were taken. This drug may not have worked at all, but the fact that it's saving lives now, and as somebody in that decision-making process, what does it feel like today for you, sir?
No, we are extremely proud of this moment, because I think whatever gamble was taken by us right from the beginning, in a way it was not a gamble, it was based upon solid science, because they had made a product for SARS and MERS, which has worked, which was on the same platform like the COVID vaccine. So I had personally no doubts about its possible outcome even in the beginning. But when we saw these results now, and the results on the efficacy and the yesterday's news about not only it protects you, but it also helps in stopping the spread of the disease. So all this has made every serum employee very proud, and we are very happy to contribute not only for India, but for the global good. Because we have today only inked the contract with UNICEF for supplying almost about 1.1 billion doses. And that's a matter of pride, not only for Serum Institute, but also for, I think, every Indian from our country.
1.1 billion doses.
Yes.
And by when would you need to supply this?
Oh, as and when they are available and when we are allowed to supply them freely. Because at this moment we are supplying them as and when we get permission from Government of India.
Ambassador Suri, isn't that absolutely incredible that, you know, there's obviously the humanitarian aspect of the fact that we can build these, we can give it to people who need it. But this is something which is India's power. It is our strength. When one talks about power, one often thinks about military strength or economic muscle. But being the pharmacy of the world is an incredible diplomatic asset. And if there is power, the use of power in international relations, is this not what it is in this context for us?
Well, Vishnu, I'd say hats off to entrepreneurs and visionaries at the Serum Institute and at Bharat Biotech and Dr. Reddy's and Cadila and all of these other wonderful companies that have really given us this title of Pharmacy of the World, the fact that we supply some 20% of the world's pharmaceutical requirements and maybe 62% of the global supply of vaccines today comes from India, does put us in this fairly unique position. It's a national asset, along with the fact that these are corporate giants that have created it. I would say that when you have power like this, use it wisely, use it gently. At a very personal level, call me old-fashioned, but I'd stay away from some of these fashionable terms like vaccine diplomacy and say that, look, the world's been going through an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. And if this is a time where we can step in and provide the relief that countries around the world need, if we have the capacity today to do that, that's a wonderful resource to have. And yes, there are attendant diplomatic, foreign policy, and economic benefits of the country, but the humanitarian side definitely comes first.
So, Ambassador Suri, given the fact that there is demand for our vaccines and that's not going away, do we necessarily have to be giving this out free when countries are willing to pay? How would you respond to those who suggest, and this is my next question, should India be charging cost price for the vaccines it sends? The government of India buys these drugs from Indian companies and then gives it free. So we take that burden upon ourselves. But if there is a demand, why shouldn't we be charging at least cost price?
Well, because, we already have an extensive development cooperation program, which provides a lot of assistance to countries around the world, whether it is countries in our neighborhood, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's countries in Africa. And this is part of our diplomatic agenda to be providing this kind of assistance to countries. And believe me, I've served in Africa, I've served elsewhere, and I've seen the difference it makes. I've seen the goodwill that it generates towards India. But there's also a second reason, I guess, for doing this right. When I was ambassador in Egypt some years back, we used to find it really difficult to crack into the local market and increase our market share, even though we were so competitive in terms of our pharmaceutical products, because there was this large kind of aura created by Western multinationals, which would aggressively lobby against Indian pharmaceutical industry. In some ways, the global acceptance and even dependence on Indian vaccines today could be like a Y2K moment, for the Indian pharmaceutical industry. We're already well placed, but those places where we were encountering resistance because of propaganda about quality of Indian pharmaceuticals, today, I think we are going to see a paradigm shift. So I think it makes sense for us to provide humanitarian assistance as part of our development partnerships program where we can.
Right.
And to charge commercial prices where the needs are not so great.
In fact, what I want to do now is just play out a small package of people around the world in our neighborhood who've received Indian-made vaccines and therefore are on the path to getting better. Well, I assume they're already okay, but the path to being inoculated. Let's take a look.
खोप अभियानको सुरु गर्न पाउँदाखेरि म अत्यन्तै उत्साहित पनि छु। मैले खोप लगाएँ र मैले यहाँहरूलाई पनि यो खोप लगाउनको लागि আহ্বান করছো।
ভালো লাগছে যে মানুষের মানে আমি একটা ভলান্টারিলি এই কাজটাতে একটা মানুষের অংশগ্রহণ করার জন্য উদ্বুদ্ধ করার জন্য অংশগ্রহণ করতে পেরেছি। It was a good feeling and there is no I didn't feel anything bad right now.
All right, so that was somebody from Nepal and somebody from Bangladesh who'd received the vaccine. Dr. Jadhav, let me come back to you. What are some of the newer vaccines being developed abroad but are going to be manufactured here in India? Could you tell us a little bit about the technologies? When will we, for example, finally have a vaccine which one dose and we'd be okay? I mean, we'd be fine.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to say that when we will have a vaccine with single dose, which will be fine. But at this moment, I think I can tell you that Serum Institute is working on 5 different candidates. One is, of course, already licensed. That is the already got the emergency use license. Other 2 candidate vaccines, the third one, the second one, we already got the permission to start the phase 3 clinical trials. And we expect that to be available by maybe August or September. It's a collaboration with the Novavax, which is a US company. The third one has also finished phase 1, phase 2 trials and will be entering into phase 3 now, which is our own product on the hepatitis B platform. And we are quite bullish on that. And the fourth one is the technology we have got again from United States, which will be the live attenuated coronavirus vaccine. And that could be the one which could be a single dose vaccine. It could be given both by nasally or by intradermally. And we are quite confident that that will also work very well in this disease.
Okay, so a couple of important examples over there. Running short on time, I want to go back to Dr. Paul. Sir, since we have the supply, and I ask you this every week or so, and you get irritated slightly, but I'll ask nonetheless. Since we have the supply, shouldn't we administer more jabs to citizens? Start with senior citizens. Why don't we start that out, sir?
Vishnu, the process of escalating the speed and the bandwidth of candidates for vaccination is happening consistently. For the last couple of days, the frontline workers are also being vaccinated. This is now running into several thousand vaccinations already being given. And very soon, yes, the individuals above the age of 50 years would also be brought in. And all the 3 waves will perhaps at some stage will be moving together. But I tell you again that when you're looking at vaccine availability, please keep in mind that A, we have to give 2 doses to every individual. B, we are going to cover 30 crore individuals in a finite period of time. And therefore, although at this stage there may be some spare stockpile with our manufacturers, all this will be used up as we go along. We have to look at the overall availability over, let's say, 6 to 8 months, and then talk about whether we have spare stockpile or not. So I assure you on that front that the vision to inoculate 30 crore people goes hand in hand with our expected availability of the vaccine, particularly from our 2 manufacturers. So it looks as if we have spare doses, but then come April or so, when the speed of vaccination will be very, very high, there will be, narrowing of this particular gap, and eventually there'll be no gap at all. So we are looking at overall planning in keeping with the increasing and emerging stockpile.
Dr. Guleria, last question to you. Is a protocol being developed for the eventual public rollout of COVID vaccines? In other words, if it's cleared for public release, how do you get it? Who gets it first? At what cost? How is that being worked out?
So I think the first step is to really meet the priority list. And as was already mentioned, that is a huge number, because if we have to really vaccinate 30 crore individuals, we will need 60 crore doses. So that is the first challenge that we have, because this will help in two ways. One is decreasing our mortality, and at the same time helping in breaking the chain of transmission. Even if you look at the sero survey data, the positivity among healthcare workers is high. So we really need to be able to vaccinate them first. Once we're able to do this, and then we find that there are enough stocks available, and hopefully by that time we will have more than one or two companies providing the vaccine, there would be other companies who would be able to provide more and more doses. Then one could look at the next stage where you could be able to open it up so that it's available in the private sector, and it can be used by people as and when they require. But the first part has to be first taken care of.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. Lots of questions. There were 14 questions. I think we got around to answering about 11 of them. And it's so wonderful to have you give these answers. All of you, Dr. Paul, Ambassador Suri, Dr. Guleria, Dr. Jadhav, pleasure speaking to you. I'm out of time. Thanks very much for being with us.